Hello, everyone. Welcome to You're Not the Boss of Me, Managing ADHD and Managing Conflict. I'm here today with Glenn Meier, who is joining me to chat about how human emotions can sabotage healthy conflict and talk about some of the lessons that we can learn from the way that we with ADHD operate on a day-to-day basis with our emotions a little bit all over the place, and how even neurotypical, for lack of a better term, folk may find that these emotions tend to take hold when conflict is afoot. So I'm Sarah Anor. I am a professional speaker. I aim to make ADHD human and also to help organizations understand that it can be profitable to support their staff and recruit staff with ADHD and other neurodivergent thinking patterns. I'm joined today by Glenn Meier, who is a dispute resolution and prevention expert. And I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to tell us a little bit about what his work is so he can do it justice for us.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm now in the category of mostly recovering lawyer, and spent a long time as a litigator, mostly in business litigation cases, and uh, really, you know, over time was able to see more and more that, hey, some people need a different approach than us against them, adversarial, one side wins, the other side loses format for litigation. And so I do mediation work, and I also work with people on how to kind of manage the conflict that comes up always in our business relationships in ways that don't lead to the courtroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, having been someone who operated in-house for a long time, I definitely am aware very acutely of that fact as well, that, the dispute portion of it where you're really in a contentious situation is to be avoided whenever possible, and that there's always a solution that we can kind of talk about and come to. So we sort of decided to break down this conversation into three sections. And the first one is sort of me explaining a little bit about what the sort of ADHD symptoms that can lead to quite a bit of conflict at times are, and why they help us have more conflict, essentially. So I always like to talk in all of my speeches and workshops about ADHD and the symptoms and what actually makes those symptoms rise to the level of a diagnosis of ADHD. Mostly because every symptom pretty much is a human symptom that everyone will have experienced at some point in their life. And so the difference really is that for folks with ADHD, they're heightened drastically. And so we're experiencing them very regularly. We have difficulty regulating a lot of the symptoms or the ways that we're thinking, or our ability, for example, to be motivated. And so on the emotional side, the dysregulation is really just an emotional dysregulation of any feeling that we have, that our reactions are often very out of proportion to what seems to have triggered them. They may be, and that doesn't matter what the emotion is. That might be anger, it might be sadness, it might be anxiety. And we also have difficulty kind of bringing ourselves back to a calm state, I guess I would describe it as. So, when I think I did a post about this particular talk earlier this week, and I said, I might be explaining that we should put certain disclosure, say, about sales tax in a prospectus. And while I'm describing this passionately to the board of directors in a meeting, I embarrassingly have a wobbly chin and seem like I'm about to cry. And that's it's not really about a sadness at all. It's just kind of a passion that physically in my body sort of manifests as that teary-eyed wobble chin kind of thing. Other examples were things like, someone has asked me to set the table, and could you do this by 7:30 when we're going to eat dinner? And then at 7:20 says, how's that table setting coming? I'm like, I am managing my time, and I'm really mad that you're bothering to bring this up right now. So it's really ridiculously small things sometimes that might bring a very firm reaction out. And that is not always positive. Sometimes it is, though. Sometimes they're the positive emotions that get really, I get very, very excited. I'm very all or nothing. If I go out with my friends and have a good time, all right, let's do this every day. Let's never stop going out and doing this thing or seeing each other. And so that's really the emotional side of it. And, you add to that the fact that we're extremely impulsive people, that it's easy for us to overthink things, to ruminate on what's going on or what someone might be thinking, especially in a potential conflict. And then some of us also have a strong sense of justice and fairness. If you ever asked my mother, well, she would tell me I had to do something and I would say, why? Pretty much 50,000 times. And eventually, the answer is because I'm the mom, that's why. And that was really dissatisfying. So it resulted in things like written diatribes about why she didn't take me to buy jeans on Saturday and she promised, and these are all the reasons, right? That it's not fair. So, we can get really dug in. And I know that this is something that's really common, Glenn, just in any kind of conflict, right? When your emotions kind of take hold in that way and you stick to your particular position, you can't see the other side's viewpoint. You're just really tied up in that fairness element, but from your own perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you have in that environment, you've created a real clear understanding in your own mind of what is fair. And so as things deviate from that, yeah, you are going to try and dig yourself in more. And I really think that a lot of what that is just that, look, I mean, somebody can give me advice on something that will be really good for me. Glenn, you ought to take a half-hour walk every day, or Glenn, you can, and and it will just make me want to do it less because
Yeah.
it's like, why are you trying to force me to do it? You're not the boss of me. I thought it was such a great title that you came up with for the conversation. And so I think that is one of the big advantages that you can get from kind of going into the core framework of what does it mean to have a disagreement, and really take that apart and say, okay, how do you want this to work? Because this default approach that we have of, again, it's us versus them, it's winners and losers. It's not about solutions, it's about compensation and remediation and assessing damage. So I think those dynamics then also reinforce the digging in.
Yeah.
So and you're absolutely right. Like, maybe for those of us with ADHD, that digging in can be amplified. But in my experience, I've been involved in a lot of conflicts.
Yeah.
It's a pretty universal human experience.
Yeah. And
Which
that's a
is,
really important point that you just made, relating to our title, right? So
mhm,
you and I have had many, many conversations that have gone on for hours about the value of process, right? And sort of how
mhm,
do
yep,
I interact with that? And for me, I mean, I understand that as having ADHD, process is valuable to me and it helps keep
mhm,
track with things. And yet I viscerally despise the concept of it.
mhm,
There's a little bit too around language, right? So you call it process and I don't want it. You call it support and I'm sure
mhm,
that sounds like a great thing. Why don't I try some of that?
yeah,
Being told to do something without, for me, because we're very analytical oftentimes too
mhm,
with ADHD. So if I don't understand the reason why you want me to do something, it's very difficult for me to accept that process. So let's have a process in play that we always do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve this outcome. And I don't really think in this case it makes sense. Well, you've got to justify it to me now,
mhm,
right? And
right,
that can be a really difficult starting point for trying to resolve a conflict. And everybody speaks differently or thinks differently and operates differently, right? So not everybody is going to be capable of explaining to my satisfaction the details of what they care about too, right? So
mhm, yeah,
yeah, it's definitely sort of a fight or flight digging in situation, I think, though, as you said, where we see it as a zero-sum game. And
mhm,
what I've been learning, and I would say is probably the biggest benefit of having been diagnosed with ADHD, is how much sort of ability to see those around us and understand a different perspective that I was lacking for a long time. And now I'm able to say, oh, wait, if I didn't even know this about myself, now that I can see myself in this light, I can see that someone else might be different and why a little bit. So,
Yeah. Well, and that's key when you talk about managing conflict, because so to me, my personal definition of conflict is really any time that you have two different perspectives on the same situation that are that's generating tension between people.
yeah.
So if that's the definition, then you are not going to get through conflict without being able to. Um, I'm sorry. I have a cat who's playing with a chessboard over here, and there's about to be pieces everywhere.
I love it.
But we'll just
Testing your focus here. Let's see what
exactly. We'll
happens.
roll with it.
Yeah.
But no, so the ability to understand another's perspective is God, I feel like this is an overused word, but vital to successfully managing conflict. Again, if you want to break this us versus them mode. So that's when it's interesting, because what are the pros of the us versus them mode? It's like it's a lot easier in my opinion, because you have a good guy and a bad guy. And obviously, who's going to get cast in the role of the good person.
Yeah, it's you.
That would be you.
That's right.
And so whoever else is not there, they're either on your side and then they're also the good person, or they're not on your side and then they're the bad person. So, I think okay, it was 13 minutes into our stream before I mentioned the current political climate in the U.S. But that's, I think we are seeing the results of pursuing conflict behaviors that uh, I think speak to kind of the very primitive parts of our brain, and grabbing a hold of those and not making the effort to bounce up out of those primitive parts of the brain.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I
Yeah.
find it interesting, and first of all, I think it's important a little bit to address the political climate, only because I think it's on everybody's heart, from what I can tell at the moment, especially in the U.S. But the idea of saying that the us versus them is easy, I just think it's important to point out that it's easy from the standpoint of it's natural and it's quick and we sort of know what it looks like.
Yeah.
But it's not easy when it comes to actually then resolving the conflict, because now you've got two very angry people facing off and nobody willing to budge, and it becomes something that doesn't ever really get resolved, because truthfully, there never really is a winner and a loser. I'll use my own litigation, for example, where I'm a client, as an example, right? I'm the plaintiff in a fee dispute. And, even if I were to win, which I kind of have, I still don't feel like I've won, because I spent so much time, I've spent so much money, I've spent so much emotional energy being angry about the situation, right? And so there's all of that makes me still a loser despite being a winner. And I think on the other side, the other person still feels like a loser if they are a loser, or if they have won, inevitably there's something else that they've lost as a result of that. Maybe it's the relationship between the two people that were once, say, friends, or good business colleagues or something like that. I would love, though, to bring it back a little bit too to what you said about conflict being any sort of situation where there is tension, because when we spoke about this before, and you gave some really good examples of how very simple that can be. Can you give us examples?
Oh yeah. So say that I'm in Toronto and I'm visiting you, and we say, hey, let's go have some lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, oh, I know a great Thai place. I'm like, not really a big Thai food fan. I actually am, but makes the story better if I'm not a fan.
Sure.
Not a big Thai food fan. I really don't want to eat Thai food. I want to spend time with Sarah. I want to have more conversation. Well, all of a sudden we have a very low stakes and very low intensity conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
it's over whether we should eat Thai food or not. Now, probably the way that's going to sort through in my head is I'm going to say, well, the desire to continue the conversation and share a meal with this person overcomes the dislike of Thai food. So I'm going to decide that the right way for me to handle this particular conflict is just to accommodate you and to say, yeah, I'm going to surrender in this one. I'm going to give in and not go with what I want.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a real simple, like you said, and low stakes and low intensity way um, to talk about what a conflict is. But you still have to go through the same process that you do of resolving a big client. You have to understand what's going on, how where is this creating tension for me in the things that I want or don't want, uh, and then you have to decide, okay, am I going to how much am I going to advocate for my wants in this? How assertive am I going to be? And then you also have to say, okay, how cooperative am I going to be with the other person?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in that case, if I decide I'm not going to be very assertive and I am going to be highly cooperative, I'm going to say I don't really care about my cuisine preferences. What's more important to me is spending the time with this other person. So I'm going to be 100% cooperative with them on where we eat and 0% assertive. And actually, what I'm I'm describing is kind of some foundational academic research that's been done on conflict styles and how we react to different situations when we're triggered
Yeah.
in conflict. But yeah,
Well,
it's
and there
all
were a
the
few
same,
things,
even though it's a little conflict.
yeah, and there was a few things in there that I thought were really, really interesting. So, um, you're going to remind me because I'm going to forget to say about values in a second, but I want to come back
Okay.
to that. But also style, right? Like I, in that case, would be 100% assertive and 0%
Hmm.
accommodating if I didn't like Thai food. I would say,
Yeah.
or maybe I'm wearing a white shirt and there's no way I'm going to eat something saucy and noodly that day. Like, no, I don't want that. But I think we also kind of talked a little bit about some of the emotional load that goes on in those conversations, right? So for me, because of my ADHD, I spend a lot of time kind of thinking and ruminating, right? And that takes energy and it makes me kind of tired. And it's part of probably what makes that regulation of my emotions less good at times.
Hmm.
Um, and so imagine, for example, we said, let's go for lunch. And then instead you said to me, sure, where do you want to go? Like my stack would likely blow. I'd be like, oh my God, you invited me to lunch and now you want me to do all the work to figure out where
Yes.
to go and how we're going to eat and what time we're going to meet and how we're going to get there and those kinds of things, right? And so it's interesting because my ability to accommodate is not great. I think it's something to practice, mind you. I'm not
Hmm.
saying that it's impossible, but my natural state is to speak my mind, tell you what I think, and hopefully come up with an alternative. I don't like Thai food today, but let's do sandwiches because they're nice and clean and neat and
Hmm.
handheld or something. But the other thing that struck me was this values piece of it, right? Because you described it as, how assertive am I going to be or how am I going to address my wants and needs? But it really also comes down to the values that you are sort of in the background making a hierarchy of. I value the conversation with Sarah. I value the time with her. I value non-Thai food, but not as much as I value the conversation continuing or keeping the relationship happy for the duration of lunch so that Sarah doesn't, maybe, and it also comes down a bit, I noticed, to maybe the relationship that you have with the other person, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if it's you and I and we're fairly new-ish contacts, you might still be a little eggshelly and making sure that you're not offending because you're not sure how I'll react yet. Whereas my brother would have a very different approach with me. He would just tell me what he wanted and probably argue deeply about it until we exhausted ourselves and one of us went out, right? And then there's complete strangers, like someone that maybe I meet through work and I have to now negotiate a contract with. And that might be a whole other level, both depending on how well I know them and what I expect of their reaction, but also depending on the power dynamic, how much I feel I will just win by being assertive.
Mm-hmm.
But it all kind of ties back to this style. And, I think I've mentioned many times that I'm left questioning after my diagnosis what even is personality, because every single thing that I thought was my personality, oh, I'm so outgoing and I all or nothing, and I have trouble with some discipline and motivation on certain things. I just don't like doing boring individual activities for exercise, for example, or I can't stop eating a bag of candy if I start it. I thought that was just my personality, and I'm learning that that's actually very much how my brain is wired and the
Mm-hmm.
executive function challenges that I have. And so, yeah, for the other side might, perhaps you have more practice, perhaps you don't have difficulty with this element. Maybe you're more of an introvert or shy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But, you have this different ability than I do to be less forceful or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that my particular brand of ADHD, and isn't that one of the lovely things about it, that everybody gets their own little cocktail
Of course. Yeah.
of what it means, is I have a lot of people pleasing in my background with it.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I am very much inclined to say, yeah, food's food, and as long as it's not something that just is completely outside my diet or anything like that, then eat it, and to put more value on the time than than on uh, exactly what food
Yeah.
is
The
going into the
details,
mouths
right?
during the time. Right. So, in that sense, you could almost turn things around and frame that approach to it as not being accommodating, but as being collaborating. Whereas, well, what I really want is the time together. The food is an incidental, so I care less about it.
Mhm.
I care more about the time. This person cares about the food. Hey, win-win. We both get what we want.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always different ways to look at it when you start digging into, what is it that really matters to you in a situation. I actually just did a post today. I'd love it, about this idea of making sure you understand when you get into conflict, what really matters to you. And I love talking about that idea because I always get to talk about the Rolling Stones, and you can't always get what you want. And but it is, gosh, those two guys, when they wrote that song, they just crystallized it perfectly. You can't always get what you want. That's just not the way the world works. But with effort, you can usually find out how to get what you need.
Yeah.
So,
Which is that
and I
compromise.
think, yeah, and that's some of the for me, kind of the joy of working with people on how to bring their pictures together, um, is it's just like this amazing opportunity for curiosity and discovering that, oh, yeah, the old story about the two girls fighting over the last orange, and
Tell me.
this is a maybe it's a classic negotiation story, but you have two young girls who are fighting over the last orange. There's one orange left in the house, and they both want it. And the mother comes in, what's going on? If I have to, whatever. And what's going on? So they start talking. Well, I want the orange. Well, no, I need the orange. I need the orange. I need the orange. Turns out one of them wants to make orange juice, and one of them has a recipe that needs orange zest.
Yeah.
So guess what? You get the peel, you get the fruit. Rock on with yourselves.
Right.
But we always start with what's the big I want this, and don't really get into necessarily we just know that's what we want, and it takes deeper inquiry than that to get in and understand, well, why do I want
Right.
this? Yeah.
Right. And I'm excellent at asking why. Just ask my mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, yeah, but why? But why? But why? Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to remember to ask that of yourself sometimes, right? Because not every
Yeah.
thing you want has to be a cut the baby in half situation, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I was obviously, as I do with ADHD, trying to get to the end of your story well before you got to it. And what I thought you were going to say about the orange is that it's full of segments. Like, why don't they just open it and they each get some, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you did me one better and said, oh, there's actually totally different pieces and they don't even need them for even remotely the same thing. So it's not even about sharing. It's about making use of both pieces and not wasting the other, and everybody actually wins 100% by taking that approach. Whereas, with the who gets the baby, like, do you cut it in half or does one or the other have to win? It's a very different conversation. Although, again, maybe you ask why, and you're like, oh, I just want the baby clothes, and the other one's like, I want the baby diaper. I don't know, whatever. And it's not actually to do with the baby at all.
Yes. The metaphor is getting a little strange there.
Like, no one wants the diaper, Sarah. But
well, interestingly enough, there's a entrepreneur out there that is developing diapers that have some, like, I don't know if it's seeds or spores or what, but they're mushrooms in the diapers.
Oh gosh, come on. They become gardens. I love it.
No, they don't become gardens.
No, what do they do?
Well, they just go into the landfill like lots of diapers.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
except then the mushrooms start eating the poop.
Yeah.
And then you know what they do? They eat the plastic. So anyway, sorry. Some people do want the poop, which is another interesting thing to think about when you're trying to get creative around conflict resolution is, one person's poop is another person's treasure.
Exactly.
And it's just about being able to hold through and really kind of dig into what's underneath that.
Yeah. And that's, I think we all cerebrally know how beneficial this is, right? We've all had that experience where you're arguing with a spouse, for example, and all of a sudden you realize actually they just really want a hug, or they just really want me to listen, or they just, wanted to tell their story. And so we all know this in our brains. And so this is precisely, I think, where the overlap between the ADHD dysregulation and conflict resolution comes in, because when in conflict, even a neurotypical person becomes really dug in, they then aren't regulating their ability to see the forest for the trees in the same way that happens to me much more frequently because of my executive dysfunction as relates to emotion. And we've talked about how sort of simply these conflicts, these little tension points, how simple they can look, and how when you hear the choose what we're going to have for dinner over a meeting conversation, you realize, oh, this happens every day, right? What time do you want to leave for the cottage? Which one of us gets to take the car today to the office? Who's going to pay for anything, the diapers, since we're on sidebar here. And so those things are happening all the time, and we're managing them day in and day out and saying, okay, what we're doing it in a micro way. What are my values? Very tiny little thoughts, and okay, I can give up on this. I don't want to have an argument. Let's move on. But tell us a little bit about what then disputes really are, because that's sort of a level of conflict, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the best way to describe it is that, for me, disputes are conflicts that get so big that they are, interfering with your ability to do the things that you want to do. So, I mean, I suppose if the choice of cuisine, if it was something that both sides dug in on, and I was like, no, we have to decide what the food's going to be before there's ever going to be a meeting. Well, now that's getting more into a dispute territory, because we might need to have the meeting to be able to come up with a plan for a rockin' live stream.
Yeah.
And so we're letting this now. We've let this conflict over what kind of food we're going to eat escalate into a dispute that is stopping us from doing our work together.
Oh, I have a great example of this, actually.
Fire.
Yeah, and it was a contract related thing. So when I was working at the bank, we were trying to do business with a company that was based out of China. And again, as a banking lawyer, I was accustomed to having pretty much all the power and clout as relates to other service providers for our business. But what I hadn't recognized is the difference in cultural negotiations. And so I walked in from, page one of the contract saying, oh, no, we have to define it this way. And then I explained exactly why. And they said, okay, fine. And then we, so they were, okay, it's not, I can live with that if I must. And, we went through the whole document almost to the very end. And then at the very end, there were a couple provisions that were actually the most important to me. And because I hadn't realized that there is sort of culturally this need to collaborate, I guess, on negotiations, right? If they say yes, I am expected to say yes for something as well. And I sort of got all the yeses and collected them up and thought, look at myself go, I'm going to get all yeses, this is going to be great. And then we got to something that was sort of a regulatory impediment and we could not compromise on, and there was no option. And so to your point, that now prevents us even from being able to do business, because that is actually the thing I really cared about. And so I forget who it was. It's some other new connection on LinkedIn who talks about contracts. I can't remember if it's Laura Frederick or someone else, but just talking about how sometimes it's important to leave things open. So here's what I would like, and here's but let's not agree until we've talked through all the other points, because at some point we might need to revisit something else we've talked about. And that's something too that we have a hard time doing, I think, is kind of going back and saying, all right, we already agreed this and I was really happy about it. But if giving you that, like you said, the poo diaper is going to be the thing that you wouldn't mind having, and I can actually live without it in exchange for this other thing that I really, really need, or this collection of things, right? You might have to give up 2 or 3 different things, and whether it's a contract, which I'm trying not to practice law, as I said, but here I am, like, bring all my life experiences out of my legal life, but it happens in life as well, right? Where you've agreed you're going to do one thing, and then there's something else down the line that you realize, if I'm going to get this, I need to give something else in this relationship.
Yeah, I really like the idea of kind of going through all of the issues before it, just so that they're, awareness, and you can kind of see how you would structure that in a mediation and say something like, well, the first thing let's make sure we know what we're talking about. So let's just generate a list and make sure we agree on the list of all of the issues, and then kind of have everybody say, okay, now you're going to give your position on this issue, and then you're going to give your, and so everybody kind of gets to put all their cards on the table. You still have to be a little, thoughtful about how you're putting those cards on the table, but you do that, and then you start to uh, make the decisions about what, what are the exchanges that feel good to everybody. Yeah.
And I think we talked a little bit before too about this idea of the need to really get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? It's not comfortable to admit that these are the things you really care about, or especially when it gets down to, I don't really care about these, right? Again,
Mm-hmm.
with that zero sum win lose game, we tend to want to hold everything in and keep it all secret, because what if it disadvantages us, right? We're always waiting for the boogeyman to jump out and say, haha, I knew you didn't need this thing. And so now you can't have any of these things, and you lose, right?
You
When,
fell for my trap.
right. Which is probably a good segue kind of into our three tools, because,
Yes.
I think the self-awareness that you need to have about what you care about, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reversing what we talked about in terms of order, but I think that is actually, it's kind of the first part, right? Because if
Yeah.
you don't know what you need and care about, and if you haven't really looked at what you think even the other person might care about, and
Yeah.
done that analysis before you start your negotiations or your mediation or your any other ADR, you're kind of starting off from a disadvantage because you're not really sure why you're there, right?
Yeah. No, you absolutely are. And so, like, when when I was doing a lot of litigation, I would talk with my clients. All right, what do you want? Well, I want everything that's coming to me under the contract. Okay, make sure we understand what you're saying that is. Okay, now let's go through each piece of it. Well, why do you want this? Why do you want that? Why do you want, to do that in advance? Um, and this works, whether you are, a lawyer who's guiding other people through conflict, or whether you're just guiding your own self through your own conflict, is really key to get awareness of what those real deep interests are, because those are the things, when those, everybody always says in negotiation, you have to have the power to walk away.
The BATNA.
Yeah.
We're getting
And I think it's a real deep understanding of your interests that helps you really see, because you're going to feel like walking away before it's time to really
of
walk
course,
away.
yeah.
And so it's understanding those interests that are really going to pull you towards knowing, I don't really like this. It's getting uncomfortable, to your point. But this is discomfort that I have to sit with and sit through in order to kind of get down to the point of really understanding what my interests are. And then, the awareness expands out. So I think awareness always starts with you,
Yeah.
and then out to others. So, it's awareness of what are your interests in a negotiation. It's awareness of what's your emotional state,
Mm-hmm.
that's happening in the midst of conflict. By the way, here's we talked about, we want to give people some concrete tools. I think this is a really good concrete tool to have for kind of regulating your emotions. Is one, first, you're going to develop what I call a pause checklist. And I'm a big fan of checklists. My father was a pilot. I have a pilot's license. I don't actively use it anymore. But checklists for pilots are a big thing. And the reason they're a big thing is because they when all of the stuff is going wrong, It's an anchor that reminds you of, okay, here are the real important priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So your pause checklist is going to start with, what does discomfort feel like in my body?
Yeah.
You know? So,
Yeah.
okay, I recognize that feeling. Checklist number one, I'm in discomfort. Then, I think checklist item number two is the ability to pause and to kind of separate yourself from the emotional reaction, and keep yourself in that higher, prefrontal cortex, good decision making state. Now, I would love to give you the silver bullet for pausing, but there isn't one,
Right.
because it's different for everybody. So the rest of the items on this pause checklist, after I can tell you, number one is know what discomfort feels like in your body. And I can tell you that the end result of this checklist is you want to be in a state that where you can kind of rise above that discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to figure out what those steps are for you. And those are the rest of the steps of your pause checklist.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's a concrete tool.
I
I wanted
love
to
it.
make sure we had one.
Yeah, I know, that's great. And I think just to tie it back into the ADHD piece for a
Mm-hmm.
second, um, one of the hardest things to do for me is actually to pause, right? And to remember. I mean, I know when I'm feeling discomfort, I'm not really aware of it. Like I'm not thinking, oh, this is discomfort. Notice this. But I am definitely, my blood is up, my face is red, my heart is racing, my teeth are clenched, whatever it is. And that pause is something that I find exceptionally difficult. Now, as you were talking about it, though, I thought it might be a good time to just mention that this is where a third party can be really helpful, right? So I was on Owen McGran's podcast, and I talked about the idea of me really valuing folks in my life that act as either babysitters or cheerleaders. And the babysitter one is super, super helpful, right? To pop in and say, oh, like, don't forget, the actual purpose of this is X. And so when you've got a mediator or a lawyer involved that's able to help bring the temperature down for you and remind you of what's important, that's helpful for everybody. It's especially helpful for me, even just in regular life. I need to somehow train my friends and family to, instead of them digging in when I get emotional, to realize, oh, wait, she's getting emotional. Let's not say, Sarah, you're getting very emotional right now. Calm down, because that's just going to explode the situation. But to be able to say, okay, what can I say calmly that might bring her back to what's really important here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are almost always more important than the emotion that you're feeling, because the emotion comes from feeling disrespected. This is something I think is so important to talk about, right? I don't think that disputes or even conflicts arise from someone not meeting the terms of a contract entirely, right? They arise from, I thought you said you'd do X and I trusted you to do it and you did not meet my expectation, right? Or you've offended me by not doing X, or you've promised me, you're going to do this at this time and it's late and now I am impacted and you seem not to have empathy around that for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to go the other direction and have all those same, not realize that you're doing the same thing to someone else. You haven't realized that this person isn't paying you not because they hate you and don't wish to, but because they have some other thing under the surface that you can't see that is making it really difficult for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you are able to, I think the good thing about the checklist is if you can manage to do it, if you can kind of get to the place where by yourself or with some support, you're able to pause and you're able to say, well, wait, what was the thing that's actually bothering me? And not just it's the fact that they didn't pay on time. It's the fact that I was expecting to have money to pay for this other thing. And now I'm disappointed or I'm embarrassed because I can't pay that bill that I was going to pay with this money that came from this person, right? And then you realize, oh, it's embarrassment. But then that reflection also allows you to start to reflect about the other person. Well, I wonder what they're thinking. Like maybe they're not actually just trying, like they're obviously not trying to make me embarrassed with my ability to pay a bill. But maybe they're not trying to, maybe it has nothing to do with me at all, the reason that they're not meeting their obligation. Maybe their company is going bankrupt. Maybe they had a horrible car accident. Maybe, they're emotionally taken up with some other family issue, right? So yeah, I think that awareness and that pause, it's a great checklist, even though it has a fill in the blank component to it. But I think you're right. It's always going to be informed by your own values and thought. Yeah, and it's just finding your own ways to figure out how to do that. That's still a work in progress for me. I don't know how, other than to have those babysitters pop up, or the counterparties and even my day-to-day life pause and say, wait, this is what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. No, and I think that's it gets back to the idea of why I think it is worth the effort to actually, okay, I'm actually going to create something in writing that says, when I notice the signs of conflict going on in my body, I will do A, B, C. Because of, it's like, well, if I'm flying an airplane and an engine falls off, that is really going to grab a lot of my attention, and it is going to activate a lot of emotions, mostly fear that I'm about to, plummet into the ground.
Yeah.
But the reality of aviation is that there are a lot of things you can do to try and keep yourself from falling into the ground, and so you need to have that clear head. You need to be up in those higher levels of your brain in order to do those things. So that's why they have the checklist to exactly kind of pull you up into the more bigger thinking.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that, did I just lose my train of thought? Hang on a minute. I've lost it. It's going to come back to me.
Okay. Well, because maybe that's fortuitous, because I really wanted to go back to what you were talking about when you were talking about kind of this process going on in yourself, and then you shifted around and started asking yourself questions about the other person who's involved. Because then I think now you're getting into another key skill for this kind of healthy conflict management, which is curiosity.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember what I was going to say, and it sort of ties to both pieces.
Oh, perfect.
Actually. Yeah. Which is the idea also, when we know that emotion is often what brings us into this really tense win or lose, fight or flight, zero sum dispute, it reminded me that we can also start the process earlier, right? We can start by having a contract, for example, if we're talking about contracting, that sets out the expectations with a little bit of the why sort of built into it in a way. We talked in our prep call about the parallels between a marriage and a business relationship, right? And a prenup and a contract kind of thing, where you if you approached every contract negotiation like you were trying to marry this person without offending them, but still needing a contract in place to set out what you're all going to do if there is an unfortunate demise of the relationship, I think we would end up in a much better place, right? Because the contract is intended to dissuade wrongdoing and to, of course, have some element of enforceability in a court at the end of the day. There's always that question of, well, which way is it going to go when a judge starts looking at it, or a certain argument is made. But if we approach it all thinking, and it reminded me of this client that I had once who was supporting folks who wanted to lease their houses through like Airbnb and stuff, and the service was to manage that whole process, right? And when people would leave, like, how do I enforce this and get a fee out of them, though? But if you have a contract that says, if you cancel the contract early, you have to pay me $1 million, that is something that is going to cause fear in the other person when they can't meet the expectation that they initially thought they could meet, right? And we oftentimes don't think hard enough about whether we can actually meet the expectation in a contract either. That's a whole other thing. But, the advice I gave was, well, wait a second, let's put ourselves in their shoes, right? You're taking their most prized and valuable asset, and they expect you to help it be profitable for them. So how can we reframe this fee as being win-win in some way, right? And even if it's, you still get everything you want and you lose nothing. Well, how about instead of I just slap you with a $1 jillion fee, I slap you with that fee, but you're also going to get the listing and the photos and the, we're going to help you get back yourself, on the platform or whatever. And now the person feels like it's a collaboration. Now it's not just I'm trying to smack you down. I'm trying to find a way that we both win if this relationship doesn't work out for us, right? And so that curiosity in advance can really make a huge difference, as well as the self-awareness, because you need to know what you actually care about as well.
Yeah.
When you look at the contracting process as already, how am I going to win in the event that there's a fight, rather than how can we all win so this relationship is successful, I think that's difficult. So tell us more about curiosity from your standpoint.
Yeah, no, I think that it is, boy, you said a million things in there that I want to follow up on. I could pull threads out of that for a long time. But to hang with curiosity, okay. Let's remember what we talked about. So we've got two different perspectives, so literally two different pictures of the same thing. My favorite story talking about this is the one about the blind travelers and the elephant, and we're kind of getting close to our time, so I won't go into the whole story, but it's like 6 blind people who've never seen an elephant before, so all of them go touch different parts of the elephant, and all of them think an elephant's something different. The person who was by the elephant's leg thinks an elephant's a tree. The person who was back by the tail thinks an elephant's a rope. The person who was up by the tusk thinks it's a spear. And of course, the person who has the trunk wrapped around their neck thinks an elephant's a snake.
Sure.
But so they've all got different ideas of what an elephant is that are all accurate and incomplete.
Yeah.
So they're all right and they're all wrong.
Right.
And really, conflict resolution is how do you take those different pieces of what an elephant is, different pictures of what an elephant is, and synthesize them into one picture. Like, that's the story. I want the sequel to the story of the blind travelers and the elephant, where we find out if they ever figured out what the heck an elephant was.
Right. Well,
right. And it happened, but to just finish up with the only way you are going to change your idea of what an elephant is to synthesize with what other people's idea of what an elephant is you got to get curious.
That's it. Because if they had all asked, right, if they'd said, oh, what are you feeling on that end of the elephant? Oh, I feel a rope, I feel this, and then they could piece the picture potentially together, right? And
exactly.
And that it also really brings us into our last concrete tool, which is it really does take some vulnerability to be prepared to do that. And I think that was highlighted in the statement you made, which I absolutely love. Everybody was right and everybody was wrong, right? This is an incomplete picture, because that really resonates with me, for example, in my litigation. I am absolutely right. The person did not meet the terms of the agreement. I am absolutely right that the person did this, 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 and this. But I'm also wrong because I've missed, what has happened on the other side, or even where I might have disappointed that person, right? By not meeting a term, or whether it's a term that's written or not, but just that vulnerability to be able to look at yourself and say, wait a second, could I be wrong actually at this moment? Or, is it really this, I am winning and you are losing? So tell me more about vulnerability.
So vulnerability, right? You have to, I think our psyches are kind of designed to tell us that we've got it all together from moment to moment, and we don't. And so you've got to come to grips with that to get to the point where you can be curious. And I'll tell you what really, there was a training that I took years ago at Pepperdine University, which, by the way, the Pepperdine Law School has some of the best learners and teachers about kind of alternative dispute resolution out there. I love that place. But I was going through a course there on the role of forgiveness in mediation and negotiation. And the instructor was, making some point to us, and he said, and he was talking about receiving, um, it was apology and forgiveness and mediation, and he was talking about receiving an apology. And he said, the thing is, when you receive an apology, there's a question you should always ask yourself, which is, and you were asking this very question of yourself, what's my part?
Yeah.
Whatever the situation that led somebody to believe they owed me an apology, what was my part? And I think that is just such a quick and powerful prompt to start you accessing vulnerability.
Yeah.
And just an understanding that we all play some role in all of the situations that we encounter, and so to be able to start with the vulnerability of, I'm going to admit that my firmly held beliefs may not represent a complete picture of the world. Like that gets you down the road.
Yeah.
And that is a very hard state to get yourself into.
Yeah. But when you mention that, it actually, the thing that immediately comes to mind is that is one thing that will bring my blood boiling down immediately, right? So the power of using that empathy to apologize for, like, the first person to say, I apologize for this thing. Immediately, it's actually my natural state to start thinking, wait a second, do I need to also apologize? And now I'm willing to, right? So that power of apology to diffuse the situation. And when we talk about vulnerability and sharing what our values are and explaining where we're coming from, instead of holding some of those cards so close to our chest, I think sharing them out loud to somebody and being vulnerable really helps to rebuild the trust that may be lost in a dispute, even to deal with a conflict, right? Like, I really, really, really don't want Thai food. It's just because I'm wearing a white shirt. It's not because I hate Thai food. It's not because, like, I just refuse to go because of this white shirt thing, but I would really still like to meet you. Can we just do it at this coffee shop and have water, because coffee also causes stains, but whatever it is. And so I think it's a great reminder too, because we talk about ADHD and all the challenges that we face all the time, but folks with ADHD are also exceptionally empathetic. We don't show it the same way as others do, as anybody who's ever worked with me will attest, but it can be a superpower, because I know when someone is feeling badly, because, if my chin can wobble at the prospectus disclosure question, I also really feel when people are angry or sad or disappointed in me in any way. And so I think tapping into that for folks with ADHD and carrying that across to everybody and say, well, if you can actually show a little bit of empathy, that curiosity, if you can ask a question, how much trust does that build? If I said, Glenn, why do you really want to go to Thai food? And you said, well, because, peanuts are my absolute favorite thing. And then I could say, oh, that's great. You know what? I know this peanut restaurant down here, or this cafe full of peanut related, baked goods or peanut brittle. I have some of that in my house. Do you want to come over and have a peanut brittle? Right? Like, we don't know what the person is actually going for, and we've caused our own conflict before we've even asked the question. And so all of these things swirl together, I think, to be an overarching, be empathetic to others and see where it gets you, I think.
Yeah. Well, and so that's such a great example of, again, the power of questions, and questions that are asked from a curious point of view, not a I'm setting you up for my argument point of view. so for example, let's say I was the one who said, "Oh, I really want to go to Thai food," and you're like, "Thai food, it's not so great." And instead of saying, "I don't want to go to Thai food," you said, "Well, Glenn, why Thai food?" Well, one answer you might get back from me is, Sarah, I'm a vegetarian, and one of the reasons I like Thai restaurants is it's usually pretty easy for me to find something that fits my diet.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to like a steakhouse. Uh, so it's just, and again, like I think all of these things we're talking about, right? Awareness, vulnerability, curiosity, even we threw empathy. Bonus fourth tool, empathy, is they all just kind of flow together. But but if you can access those things, they really can help you see other people. And when you make someone feel seen, that is deeply meaningful to them.
Mm.
And then reciprocity kicks in. Now they want to see you.
Right.
So this is something that is especially on my mind, this in this time with the events that are going on right now, is that when you are in those situations where you are involved in a conflict where there's not a lot of curiosity and not a lot of empathy being shown, somebody has to go first.
Yeah.
And that going first is a really vulnerable thing to do.
Yeah.
Because you might find out that, oh no, in fact, I do consider you my adversary and I do want to destroy you.
Yeah.
But then at least you know the ground you're on. So
Yeah, and I think that part about going first can kind of go in any direction, right? If I, for example, am looking for someone, I go, why can't they just get curious? Why don't they understand where I'm coming from? Then we switch from curiosity to my vulnerability, and I say, if I'm being honest, I don't like vegetables. I need to have meat at every meal. I need to be at somewhere that's not just going to be a vegetarian location, right? But then now we have another input to make a good decision that works for both of us, that we're both able to use. And that takes the self-awareness. It takes the, not having a mindset of just pure conflict. And they all just swirl around. And I think, if you made a really great point that I just thought to myself, that encapsulates exactly what I'm trying to do in my work, right? Is I'm trying to make ADHD human as one element of how people start the journey to learn about this. Let's not necessarily start with an entire strategy around everything. Let's start by getting curious. Let's start by understanding what folks are facing. What have I faced in the past? What might other people be facing? Because now I can design a strategy that plugs into all of those things and is really useful and purposeful and valuable, because the people that are going to use it are going to feel seen because they already know that you've done that work. And then on top of that, it becomes profitable because feeling seen, I want to stay loyal to you. I want to stay at my job, being accommodated, even in the simplest of ways that may not be, special equipment or anything, but so many free ways to be accommodated, like listening when I tell you that I really don't do well working in the morning. I prefer to work in the afternoon. Oh, sure. Whatever works for you, just get this result would be I know it's not always possible. We build some of that flexibility. And I think the last piece of that is it has to be really quite individual, right? We have to get out of our own head saying, well, everybody else does it this way. So what is your problem? And say, I believe you. You're telling me that you need something different than others. Let me try to stay curious and be vulnerable. Here's where I can't do it. Here's where I can. Does any of this maybe work? What is the alternative to get us to a solution?
Yeah.
So we're 5 minutes over time. It's really impressive, actually. I was expecting it would be about 27 minutes over time given our past conversations, but it was a pleasure. Do you have any parting words? I'll just put up your your website information here. So if folks want to find you, they can go to glennmeier.com and check out the alternative ways that you can support them through conflict. But
Yeah.
any parting words before we wrap?
Yeah, you know what? This is kind of my message that I'm taking up, and so just it's July of 2024 when we're recording this. It is the Monday after one of the candidates for election in the United States was shot, and thankfully only minorly wounded. And it is a turbulent time here where I live. And I read something this weekend that I like to share with people, which is that polarization and overcoming polarization is not a problem that we leave to our politicians to solve. It is a we the people problem. And so if you are one of the people in the world who is, really frustrated at this feeling that we're all just against each other and that's not how it's supposed to be, you know what? You need to find somebody you disagree with, and you need to have a curious and vulnerable and aware conversation with them, because you're going to find out some good things about that person, and they may help you understand and see some pieces of the elephant that you're missing.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, this is not a zero-sum game when it comes to any element of life. And as we said, conflict boils down to relationships and individuals, not to, like, if we let ourselves get hijacked by fear, we're not going to get anywhere in that. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing us back to the need to take a breath. Let's press the pause button and
let's
go
run our pause checklist.
That's it. Pause checklist. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Glenn.
Thank you.
We had so
Wonderful.
much we could have unpacked, but I guess we'll have to do it again sometime.
We will, apparently.
Right. Sounds amazing. Thanks everyone for joining us. And
thank you
again. All right. Bye.